on all of the different streams to fire up. If you're new to the show, new to the program, we simulcast this on Twitter, on Periscope, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And YouTube is always slow to get the stream fired up, so we're waiting on that there. And boom, there we are. So we are now live on all of the platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. This is Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Watching the Watchers is a show that we do to monitor police misconduct, judicial misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, any misconduct that is going on in the criminal justice system, in our world, in our society. We are going to cover it. And of course, since we're coming to you live, we're talking about something that is, of course, very applicable to everybody. It's been in the news. It's something that is impacting everybody in the United States and really the world. We're talking specifically about the George Floyd protests. So today what we're going to do is dive into the George Floyd protest. There was breaking news as of just a couple hours ago out of Minnesota. They have decided that they are going to increase the charges on the officer who actually had the knee on George's neck, which is Derek Chauvin. He got an additional charge added on there. There are probably going to be some more charges coming. The other officers as well, looks like they are now going to be facing charges, which is good news. It's positive news in the entire case. Of course, we all wanted to see justice be done. What we're going to do is we're going to break down those actual charges. So it went from a third degree to a second-degree murder charge. I want to tell you about that. And then I want to tell you a little bit more about what that aiding and abetting statute specifically looks like. We know that the Floyd family wants first-degree murder charges. I'm going to explain to you why that's probably not going to happen. Then what I want to do is really break down these protests. I'm going to imagine that although we have had some progress, some developments in this case, we are still going to see protests. We're still going to see a lot of people who are very upset with what is happening in our justice system. And of course, we are in that group. So let's take a quick look. Let's do a quick recap because it's been a week since I've been on the show. And last week, it was Wednesday, when I was doing the show, the protests were just getting started. I started the show. By the time I got off the show, they were actually burning down, buildings and things. Like, things escalated very, very quickly last week. And so a lot has happened since that time. Let's just do a very quick recap so we can review what has been happening. So this is the timeline that I wanted to point out. So if you remember, just over a week ago on May 25th, George Floyd was actually killed. In my opinion, he was murdered. That's going to be up for a court to decide. So that happened on May 25th. The very next day, we had all of the officers were fired. So on May 26th, all 4 officers were fired. The public started really catching wind of the video. They got, rightfully very upset about what they saw, and the protests began kind of early. Early on, we started to see people line up, but then as it progressed, things got a little bit more aggressive. Now, 3 days after that, Derek Chauvin was arrested on May 29th. Arizona, which is where we're based, we began our curfew on May 31st. A couple days after that, the National Guard got called in. And then today, all of the officers were charged. So we are here now on June 3rd, and all 4 officers have been charged with crimes in this case. And it's certainly good news. We're going to go through, as we go through on the show today, we're going to break down the different statutes, and I'm going to run you through how they work specifically. Looking back at some of the numbers, I want to point out that curfew we are seeing now in at least 12 states. The National Guard has been called in to 24 states. Washington, D.C. as well, with over 17,000 troops activated at our last count. At least 11,000 people have been arrested, many of those for just peaceful protests. I'm imagining people are being arrested for that as well. We're seeing some of that here in Arizona, and we are also seeing people die. We are seeing 12 deaths that have been confirmed. In my mind, it's probably a lot higher than that. We've seen a lot of people, seriously injured. We've seen a lot of damage throughout the country. A lot of businesses are being burnt down. A lot of, looting, rioting is occurring. And of course, that is going to cause lasting, compounding impact, long-lasting effects that are going to be felt by business owners and by other citizens who are injured and had their property destroyed or unfortunately had their life taken from them as a result of these riots. And so those 12 deaths, that comes from, I think Wikipedia is actually keeping a pretty good tally. So that was the last place that we checked. And there are actually more than that. They just haven't confirmed that it is a direct result of the George Floyd protests. And so that's where we stand. You know, the numbers are dramatic. They're pretty serious. That's why I put them up there. There is something very big happening in our country, something that I have never seen. I was talking with other defense attorneys. I was talking with a lot of older people, you know, with 40, 50, 60 years on me. They're telling me, you know, they've never seen anything quite like this either. Everybody, you know, saw the Rodney King riots, and we've had protests and all of that stuff back during the Obama administration, but nothing quite like this, nothing on a national scale and a global scale. So it's been kind of an interesting sight to see. And I don't think it's going to be ending. I don't think it's going to be letting up anytime soon. So as we discussed, all officers were charged. The 3 other former Minneapolis officers were charged with aiding and abetting murder in connection with the death of George Floyd. And so what I want to do is I want to run through those different degrees of murder, because I'm seeing a lot of bad information out there, at least in regard to what they think that Derek Chauvin should be charged with and what these other guys should be charged with. So if you remember, the original charge that was filed, so Derek Chauvin was arrested, the original charge that he got, the kind of the big one, the one that everybody was interested in, was a 3rd-degree murder charge. Okay, and this is actually what the statute says. And it's kind of a weird charge because it's not necessarily applicable to what he did, and I'm going to explain that why here in a minute. This was kind of my initial instinct, and I read a great article by a gal. I'm going to explain who she is, and she really broke it down in a way that I think is very easy to understand, and I'm going to kind of translate it in YouTube video PowerPoint format. So let's take a quick look. So here's the original charge for 3rd-degree murder. By perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life, a person can be liable for 3rd-degree murder. Okay, so one more time. By perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. So this is a statute that's, you know, it's kind of written in that old English, that old legalese. It's very difficult to sort of understand what this means in everyday common terms. But what I want to really highlight here specifically is that this statute, so this was the original charge that Derek was charged with, specifically says eminently dangerous to others. Okay, so you see this here, to others. And that may sound, you know, pretty obvious. Like, obviously that would include George Floyd, right? Or that would include anybody. But it's actually a problem in this particular case because according to this jurisdiction and this case law, here's what they have decided. So this comes from a case out of the Supreme Court of Minnesota, which is going to be the highest court in the land. And here's what they say. So this case comes from a case called State of Minnesota versus Charles Ray Barnes. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And here's what they said. So remember on the last slide, we're talking about depraved murder. What is 3rd-degree murder? What is that? Well, here's what this court clarifies. So we read the statute. The court read the statute also, and they said, okay, here's what it actually means. Depraved mind murder cannot occur where the defendant's actions were focused on a specific person. All right, so let's break that down. Depraved mind murder cannot occur where the defendant's actions were focused on a specific person. So this is from a Supreme Court case that is interpreting that lower level statute. And what they're saying is, if it's about one particular person, one specific person, this is not applicable. Okay, so in this case, in George Floyd's case, it involves Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. Derek Chauvin comes in, initiates the arrest, puts him on the ground along with the 3 other officers, puts his knee on his neck, sits there for about 9 minutes, and he dies. Okay? That entire chain is happening with a very, very specific person in mind. So Derek Chauvin, the officer, is now acting upon George Floyd. It's a specific person. That's what invalidates it. That's what pulls it out of the 3rd-degree murder charge, because it's a specific person. So, okay, well, then why do we have a 3rd-degree murder charge? So what is that for? It says very clearly it has to do with other people. George Floyd was another person. So what is this for? Well, the depraved mind murder types of statutes, these really kind of broad murder statutes, are reserved for other types of criminality. So criminal charges, they're just descriptions of criminality. They just describe something that we've observed as a society, and we've decided to make that a crime. So we're just looking at what the law says, and we're seeing if it matches up with what happened in the case. And so we want to carve out rules, exceptions to rules, and different crimes for things that don't involve specific people. So, for example, let's say you're out with some friends, you're out, drinking, you're doing something like that. You go into somebody's backyard, somebody has a gun, somebody says, you know what, it'd be fun, we're all having a good time, let's just pop off some rounds. Okay, cool, sounds fun. We're going to just fire that up over into that direction, just take our gun and just pop, fire off some rounds. Hey, that's fun, it was cool, it was a good gun, neat gun, good purchase, whatever it is. Those bullets kill somebody because they land and they smash through somebody's roof and it hits somebody in the head and they die. Okay, that was a non-specific person. That was somebody just generally out there in the world where we didn't know who it was, we didn't know their name, we didn't know if it would hit them or not. But the activity of firing that gun into the air is so depraved, it's so obvious that what you're going to do is going to have serious repercussions for somebody else. All right. And that's where this particular part of the law comes into play. It's for this category, this classification of crimes where it's not A to B. It's A to whomever. We don't know who it is because it's so ambiguous. It's so vague. Another kind of example would be if you kill somebody drinking and driving, right? You get in your car, you leave the bar, you start driving your car. You're not intending to kill anybody. You have no desire to do that. You don't plan on hitting anybody. You don't plan on crushing, smashing through the building, but you do, and somebody dies as a result of that. You did something that was so dangerous, it was so depraved in your mind that it caused somebody else to die. That's what the description of third-degree murder is, and it doesn't include anybody who's specific. Cannot be a specific person. It comes exactly from this case. So that means this is not going to apply to George Floyd's case. Now, this woman, Amy Swearer, who I linked her Twitter down here, she's the one who actually found this case, or I don't know if she found it, but she brought it to my attention. I read an article that she wrote, and she's explaining that this case exists, and obviously I don't practice law in Minnesota, and so there's a lot of other people who are more qualified to do the legal research on their behalf. But she comes up with a great point, and her question from the very beginning was, why did they even charge him with this? This is not even applicable. So she did the research. Third-degree murder just simply didn't fit. That description of the events did not match, or that type of crime, that description of criminality, of liability, does not match the George Floyd case. Okay, so then what does? Why did they charge it that way? I don't know. Probably because they screwed up. They were really racing to file charges of something, and they just didn't cross their T's and dot their I's, which is why we're seeing that charge exist. Now, what is the new charge that has been added on? It's a second-degree murder charge. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the underlying penalty, the maximum penalty for third-degree murder is 25 years. The maximum penalty for second-degree murder is 40 years. So it's an improvement in terms of justice, at least for that particular segment of our society. There's a lot of people who say that he should be charged with first-degree murder, which is just not, the statute just doesn't fit at all. First-degree murder just doesn't fit. And the reason why is because it requires premeditation. It would have meant that Derek would have had to have woken up that morning and said, I'm going to go kill George Floyd, and set out to do so. He had a plan in place, and he was going to go execute on that plan. And we've seen just no evidence of that at all. And what we're looking at here with the second-degree murder charge is also lacking premeditation. It's lacking intent. So while people want first-degree murder, they want to say, as soon as he put his knee on that neck, he intended to kill him. There's very little evidence of that, actually. If you in terms of concrete evidence, did he say, I want to kill you? Did he intend to do it? Did he tell his partners about that, or what? There's just no concrete evidence that he intended to wake up and kill him. So first-degree murder doesn't fit. Second-degree murder is broken up into two parts. You have an intentional part, and you have an unintentional part. Let's run through that second unintentional part, because that's the one that really applies. All right, so here is the statute itself. Okay, 60919 sub 2, it's going to be unintentional murders. Whoever does either of the following is guilty of unintentional murder in the second degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 40 years. So here is the key part of the statute. Causes the death of a human being without intent to affect the death of any person while committing or attempting to commit a felony offense. One more time. Causes the death of another. So in this case, that's going to be George Floyd, without the intent to to affect the death of George Floyd while committing or attempting to commit a felony offense. So this is really where I think the strongest argument is, and this again is something that Amy Swearer brought up, and she's pointing to this subsection. What she's saying, if you remember this on a previous video that I covered about the Ahmaud Arbery case, this is felony murder. That's what that means. So in the process of committing another felony, you kill somebody, you can be charged with felony murder for that person's death. So if we backtrack, remember Ahmaud's case, we're saying that everybody there got charged with murder, felony murder, in large part because although Travis, who was the one who actually pulled the trigger, pulled the shotgun, and actually killed Ahmaud, Gregory McMichael was in the back of the truck. And so what turned that from a simple sort of false imprisonment, unlawful arrest into a murder charge was they were doing all of that. They were committing felonies by falsely imprisoning him, by conducting an unlawful citizen's arrest. And then when he died, they all got charged with felonies as a result of that. Felony murder, because they were involved in committing a felony and somebody died during the commission of that felony. So it's very similar actually to what we have here. And I want to just kind of diagram this out because what we're going to see is there's a progression that takes place. We have to connect the dots. So anytime we think about these types of issues in criminal law, we're talking about sort of following the sequence. We have to follow causation. And there are different times when something is lawful, but then it becomes unlawful. So in other words, when Derek Chauvin was with George Floyd and he originally used force to restrain him, there was at some point where that was totally lawful, had every right to do it, covered by qualified immunity, would have never gotten in trouble from the police department. But as that progressed, he started to lose the lawful right to continue to do what he was doing. So let's run through that because I want to show you how normal, regular, non-intentional conduct can be protected, and then it can turn very bad very quickly. So I have that broken down in a diagram. Let's take a quick look here. So this is how it works for second-degree murder. So this is sort of a visual analysis of what I was just talking about. Let's run through it. Okay. So at the very beginning, when George Floyd is with the officers, we see on some body cam, we see on some surveillance footage from other businesses that he gets approached by the cops and they use force. They put him in handcuffs, they detain him, and they start to arrest him. You can see him kind of getting agitated with them and being totally cooperative, but just a little, anybody's irritated when the police are harassing you. So they bring him around the corner. They've got him in handcuffs. They've got him totally subdued. He says, "I don't want to get into the back of your vehicle because I have claustrophobia," and he kind of puts up a little bit of a fight. Then they bring him down to the ground. He's covered by 3 different officers. So 3 different officers are now four of them actually, if I remember right. 4 of them are laying on him, and Derek has his knee on his neck. So this is where this use of force, which is here, sort of transitions into this spot here where it's no longer necessary. So we use the force, then he's subdued, and the force becomes no longer necessary. And so you can see here I have this kind of in the yellow-orange box, which means, it's not good. Okay, this is okay. This is allowed. This is where it becomes problematic. If you continue to do it, now you're going to be violating police policy, the departmental policy. That's not allowed anymore. We don't authorize that type of chokehold. As soon as the person is restrained, you don't need to use excessive force anymore. There's a point in time when that excessive force actually expires, or the need for that excessive force expires. You don't need that anymore. You don't need to use that force. So that's what we see in the George Floyd case, right? He's in handcuffs. He's on his stomach. Derek Chauvin has his knee right on his neck, and he's slowly passing out and dying. And very clearly, that use of force is no longer necessary, and it now becomes a violation of policy. And this is very important because violation of policy is what we're going to look at in terms of how do the other officers get liability. Those other 3 officers, they didn't have their knee on his neck, but are they still liable? Is there some criminal culpability there for them? We're going to explore that, but it's important to note that there is a time and place as this case progresses, where there is no more policy authority to continue to proceed there. All right, we move forward, and what ends up happening is once that point expires, so once Derek Chauvin starts to recognize that force is no longer needed, he should know he's in violation of departmental policy, should not continue to do this. He's got other people, other bystanders calling his attention to it, saying, listen, think he's dying, my friend. You may want to get off of him. Doesn't do that. So as I said, that use of force actually expires. And now what he's doing is committing a new crime. So because he's not entitled to do that, he's not immune from doing that, it's now outside of the scope of his duties as a lawful police officer, that continued force now becomes felony assault. So now this is where he's in criminal territory, okay? Or it could be regular assault, could be felony assault. It's the same kind of process that goes through here. Floyd becomes unresponsive. So now the assault is turning into one that's a very serious assault. It's absolutely now a felony now in most jurisdictions in Arizona. If you cause somebody to lose consciousness, that's going to be, you know, a lot higher level felony offense. It's going to involve choking and things like that. They charge it as a felony. So same in the Minnesota jurisdiction. So now Floyd is responsive, and now this is all in felony territory. And what happens is, of course, Floyd dies, and because there was a death, that's going to be felony murder. So you can see how it sort of just progresses. It starts out as benign, not really any violation of the law, gets worse and worse until Floyd is dead. Now, this doesn't require any intention. Okay, the felony murder doesn't require any intention. He didn't intend to do it. He didn't wake up and do it, but he did it. And he did it on the basis of an underlying felony. So he was committing an assault, and because of that assault, somebody died. Therefore, he's responsible for that person's death. That's going to be felony murder. That's the underlying basis for this new charge. Now, there are a lot of course, counter arguments to that. The defense is going to chomp at the bit to dive into his drug use, the fact that he had fentanyl and some methamphetamine in his system, and they're going to basically try to break up this chain. They're going to say that essentially this felony murder was not a result of any assault. So the underlying felony offense was not actually an assault, and that the use of force was basically lawful throughout this entire process. I think it's a stretch. I don't think that that's going to go anywhere, but they are going to try to break up that causation, that chain. So what you can see here is we set up these little rectangles, color code them. Think of those as sort of dominoes. One's got a domino into the next in order for that criminal culpability to attach. And if you pull one of those dominoes out, that chain is going to be broken. And that's what the defense, that's kind of the overarching theory on what they are wanting to charge. Now, I know George Floyd's family is very interested in first-degree murder charge. I don't think that is relevant at all. JPH Production said, "Do you think we could possibly go for murder one in the George Floyd case?" I don't. I really don't. I just don't think that the statute is there. I don't think the facts don't match the statute. So unfortunately, there's no evidence that this officer, Derek Chauvin, woke up and decided, I'm going to go kill George Floyd. I'm going to go kill somebody today. There's just no evidence of that. So it requires a lot more premeditation than anything that we've seen. It requires a plan. You have to think through it, and you have to go do that. So I think second-degree murder, which is a much more serious charge than the third-degree murder, which he was originally charged with, is more serious. It is something that I think has a higher likelihood of sticking, and we're going to see what happens. So he's been arrested, of course, and he was charged with second-degree murder. Don't think first-degree murder is going to happen. Now, the other three cops, they did get charged. My understanding today, this all happened today, so I haven't really had a chance to dive through the actual, any indictments or anything like that. But from what I have gathered is the three officers are being charged for aiding and abetting. And here is sort of what the statute says there. You can be criminally liable for a crime committed by another if the person intentionally aids, advises, hires, counsels, or conspires with or otherwise procures the other to commit the crime. So there's a lot in there, right? There's a lot. Did any of those officers aid Derek in putting the knee on the neck? No. Did any of them advise him to do that? No. They didn't hire him. They didn't counsel him. They didn't conspire to have him do that. Did they procure him to do that? Maybe. Maybe they procured that to happen because they had a bunch of cops kind of surrounding the area and making sure that nobody else could interfere with Derek Chauvin having his neck on George Floyd's neck, his knee on George Floyd's neck. So does this fit? Do they aid and abet? Well, on the face of that statute, it doesn't really look great. But again, I'm going to go back to Miss Amy Swearer, and what she has done is she pulled a great case. It's called State v. Parker. And it says that the bar is actually very low. So what is aiding and abetting? It's a very low standard. Basically, you can do it for almost anything. And in a case that she found, or at least brought to my attention, in State v. Parker, which was decided in 1969 by the Supreme Court of Minnesota, here's what they say. They found that there was enough evidence for a jury to convict where the defendant was present and did nothing to prevent the offenses committed or the brutal beating the victim endured. So the Supreme Court in the 1960s has said, the Minnesota Supreme Court has said that if you do nothing to prevent the offense being committed, then that's essentially aiding and abetting. And I think it fits under that standard. If you take a look at that aiding and abetting statute, I think it fits. I think it's something that they're going to be successful on moving forward in the aiding and abetting charges. Now, of course, they're going to ask for plea deals, and they're going to try to reduce this stuff all the way down. And their defense is going to be that they didn't know, they didn't have any idea that he was dying, and they're going to make all these excuses again to break that domino, to break that chain, to relieve them of culpability. But the good news is that a lot of the kind of demands that all four of these officers be held responsible seems to be happening. So we got a new update today that they're all being charged. Charges on Derek are actually getting more serious. So from a maximum of 25 years up to 40 years, which I think is welcome. All of these guys for a long time seem to have sort of escaped, or at least police officers in general, they kind of escape some liability here. And of course, in a situation like this, where three guys are standing around and watching another cop do something that is outside of policy, that in no way, shape, or form is necessary at all, that results in somebody's, death, and should they escape all liability for that? I certainly do not think so. So now that we've had these arrests, now that we have people who are, at least in the George Floyd specific case, are they going to see justice? We don't know. We're going to continue to follow through, but it begs the question, does that solve a lot of the turmoil? Does that solve the sort of the chaos, the protests, the riots, the things that we've been seeing? Is this the final key? Are we done with this issue? And of course the answer is no. Of course the answer is no. So there are people now protesting around the world. We're seeing things get extremely heated. We're seeing some very grotesque behavior. And so, my kind of thought at this point in time is I really want to kind of dial in, and I want to say, what is going on here? What is happening? I'm very happy that we're having this conversation. I really like talking about criminal justice reform because it's sorely needed. It's something that that I've been living for about the last 10 years. And what we're trying to do is analyze, how can we be most productive? How can we move the ball forward on this thing? So I'm excited that we're having the conversation, but I'm also extremely disappointed with what I'm seeing out there. We're seeing some very, very, really gross behavior, really gross conduct. We're seeing a lot of property destruction. We're seeing people getting killed and murdered all over the place. We're seeing, attacks on cops. We're seeing attacks on non-cops. We're seeing attacks on black people. We're seeing attacks on white people. And it's just kind of chaotic around the board. And is it legitimate? Is this something that is desired, a wanted? Do we want this in our country? Do we want this type of behavior? We're going to dive into it. So I'm going to go through a little bit more about John Locke and about the foundational underpinnings of revolution and rebellion and how that all works. But before we dive into the really meaty part of the philosophy behind what's going on, what is actually going on? Okay, so as is the case in many of these situations, it starts out around one specific incident. Everybody was upset about George Floyd getting murdered by police officers. Yet another black man killed by some white cops. And this has been a theme in American history for a long time, and it's a huge problem. And so that's what fired everybody up. But now, what are we seeing on our streets? Is this really about justice reform? Is this really about a black and white thing? Is this really Black Lives Matter? Is this Antifa? Is this white supremacists? Are these police who may be actually responding to the fact that their brethren just got charged with crimes? With four different people just got charged with crimes? Are the police instigating any of this? What is going on? I don't know. I mean, I've got some examples here. Let's run through and let's see what's happening in our world. So here's a situation from New York. Doesn't look good at all. We've got the NYPD.
Oh my God.
Just smashing through protesters. Extremely reckless, extremely dangerous. People are very upset, as you can see. They're just bulldozing
Slow
over.
the F down. What is wrong with you?
Not good.
They just want to kill someone. It's just clear.
Yeah, and so if you didn't hear her commentary in there, she says it's clear. They want to kill somebody, you know, and I don't know who she's talking about, but it could go either way. A lot of the people on that scene, it looks like they wanted to kill the cops. The cops were driving in a way that was so reckless that it's almost surprising that they didn't kill somebody. And I understand their position. They're surrounded by a bunch of very, very pissed off people. And so they've got to get out of there on their own. And so it's just a bad situation all around. I mean, this is just not good. You know, what are these cops doing? What are these people doing? You know, what is really happening here? But we're seeing instigators from both sides, and it's really hard to kind of tease out the meatball from the noodles and from the meat sauce. It's all getting thrown into this one big bowl, and it's really difficult to figure out what's happening. So let's take a look at a couple other examples that Faith had pulled to see what's happening out there in the world.
Oh, there's more. Look at this. They just keep coming.
Go! Go inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get in your house now! Let's go! Light him up! Go inside now! Get in the house!
Get in, get in, get in, get in, get in, get in! Get in!
Oh, God, that hurt. You good?
Are you okay?
Right on the fucking crotch.
Are you okay? You got hit?
I'm good.
So right on private property, those people were in their home. They were sitting there. The cops, in a massive show of force, are going right down the neighborhoods, just kind of, you know, eliminating anybody on the streets. They're on their property, on their front porch, just walking out, looking out there into the world, and they see this happening. You can hear very clearly, if you watch it, listen closely in that video, one of the officers is screaming, "Get back in your house, get back in your house, go inside, go inside." Of course, you know, they're within the confines of the law, as far as I can tell. I don't know what specific house that was or what jurisdiction they're in, but provided that they're following the curfews, they're not on public streets. In Arizona, our curfew rule says don't be on public streets, don't be on private streets. They're in their home, they're on their front porch, and these cops start firing, you know, projectiles at them. Look like a paintball gun, essentially, which is, you know, very painful, very dangerous. People have been killed by paintball guns. And, you know, this is probably a tactical version of whatever you use recreationally. So very, very, you know, powerful weapon, very, very anti-people, anti-rioting, very painful. They just start firing right off into the direction of people who are sitting in their homes on their personal property, right on their front porch. What? You know, is that what we're talking about? So if you're seeing situations like this, who is the instigator here? Is it the protesters out there on the streets, or are these cops just really, you know, fired up and pissed off at the world because of something that's going on that they're not happy about? Which, of course, we could all say, you know, their brethren are being prosecuted. So they're out there now firing rounds of something at people who are on their private property. Not good. Not too good at all. All right, this one is another clip. This is great. So we found this on Twitter, and this person pulled a bunch of clips from a bunch of other people, and they credited them. So you're going to see the credits where this all came from right up at the top left, and it's about 2 minutes long, but it's a great summation. You know, a lot of people are on the online, these protesters, these looters, these rioters, they're destroying everything. They're burning everything down, but they're kind of forgetting, you know, how much of this stuff is being instigated by the police. It's disturbing. Let's take a look.
We got plenty of time here.
Are you okay?
I'm getting shot! I'm getting...
Katie, are you okay?
You can't fucking do that! Get the fuck on! Get the fuck on! Don't touch me either. Fuck you gonna do again? What the fuck you gonna do about it? Nothing. I'm leaving.
He's not doing anything! He's doing protest!
Get the fuck on! Go! Get the fuck on! Get out of here! Fucking leave it!
Yeah, really, really disturbing stuff, right? These police are, from this video, they seem to be aggressors in kind of each one of these clips. Now, I'm not blind to the fact that anybody can go to a protest and they can certainly clip bad actors, bad behavior from people who are doing bad things and make a clip video of it. Okay, we've seen a lot of the other side of this. We've seen everybody taking, you know, forklifts and smashing them through Best Buy. We've seen video of all the looters, all the rioters, everything burning down. We've seen people running out with tennis shoes and TVs and all of that stuff. We've seen that, but we are not seeing so much of this, right? Are you seeing any of this on the major media? Are you seeing any of this in, you know, on the you know, Fox or MSNBC? What I've seen is the bad actors, the protesters, the rioters, but the police are getting a pretty good pass on this stuff. And if you were watching this video, it looks like to me like the police are instigating a lot of this. They're causing a lot of this. All of these clips, people are pulling away. They're running away. They're walking. They're getting maced in the face as they're walking down the street because these cops are instigating. They're causing some of the turmoil. They're causing some of the unrest. And it's a big problem because what they're doing is they're stepping all over your rights to protest. We're going to get into it here very shortly, but I want to explain clearly that the right to protest, the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances is so fundamental. It's ingrained at the very base level of everything that we've done in this country. It's in the very First Amendment. I'm going to run through that with you quickly, but it is important. You have a right to go protest. You've got a right to go be on that street. You have a right to be angry about what you're seeing from your government. It's part of the American tradition. We left England, of Great Britain. We threw a whole revolution over being upset with your government. It's ingrained in what we do. There's a legitimate way to do it and a non-legitimate way to do it. And so we're going to break that down, but we're still trying to understand what the heck is actually going on. So this was right in our backyard. This was about a minute down the street from our office. This was happening in Scottsdale.
They just got into the Apple store in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Fashion Square, this is the big one.
Okay, these are not police. These are people
This is getting spooky.
who are only looting. They're not doing anything. So right as the cops were, as I'm coming down on the cops for acting egregiously, what you're seeing there is egregious also. Those people are looting, they're stealing, they are committing crimes, not in the interest of George Floyd, not in the interest of justice reform, not because they want to see a major catastrophic, a cataclysmic change in our society. They're doing it because they want an iPhone. They want the new AirPods, they want that type of stuff. So that is also totally illegitimate, totally wrong, totally bad. Don't condone any of that. Just like I don't condone anything that the police are doing. I think one more example. I want to show you a picture that I found on Twitter. This was something that I've talked about for a long time. We talk about this idea, this concept of the thin blue line. The thin blue line is this idea that the police protect themselves. They protect their own. They circle up their wagons. Anytime one officer is under fire, they all will circle up and they'll go and protect that officer. We saw this very specifically in this case. Derek Chauvin, when he was arrested, there are pictures of lines of police officers outside the front of his house protecting his property. He wasn't even in there. He was arrested. But all of these officers lined up and they protected his home. Okay, this was a guy, they saw the same video that you and I saw, the same video of Derek putting his neck on his friend, on George Floyd's neck, his knee on George Floyd's neck. I always get that wrong. And all of his officers, his friends, stood by and watched it happen. So when he gets arrested and thrown into jail, they protect his home against looters and rioters and protesters and people who are very, very angry. Why do they do that? They saw him kill that guy just like you saw it, just like I saw it, and they're still protecting him. That's how deep the bond is. That's how fundamental it is to these people. And ask yourself that question, right? I mean, what if somebody in your company was caught on film killing somebody? Would you show up at their house and stand outside and protect their property? I mean, maybe you would, if you knew that person at a deep level and you said it's not possible, he's not capable of that. I can understand that. I can understand saying, I really don't believe that person is capable of doing something like that. I know what I saw, but there's got to be more to the story. And you go and you support that person. But these other officers, they're lining up in force. The entire force, it looked like, was out there protecting that guy's property because it's the blue line. It's the blue shield. What is the thin blue line? Let's take a quick look.
The thin blue line is a symbol representing the men and women of law enforcement who hold the divide between order and chaos. The black space above, which on a flag is speckled with stars, represents citizenry and order, while the darkness below, crime and anarchy. Running between them, a thin blue line that keeps them apart, separating the chaos from the order. The thin blue line flag is flown to show support for our heroes in law enforcement and serves as a consoling reminder that they will always be there to protect us. For those who walk it, the thin blue line is a reflection.
All right, so enough of that propaganda bullshit. So that's propaganda from the police that they show to other people. You can see it here that they actually hung that flag in place of the American flag. So they pulled down the American flag and the Cincinnati police put up the thin blue line flag. So they are the only ones who can keep us from order and chaos. They put the American red flag at the Justice Center. They replaced it with the thin blue line. And, it's just, they're the only ones who save us from order and chaos. They're replacing the flag that embodies all of America, all of American values, with police propaganda. Total bullshit. They took down the flag that you and I, that we respect, that we love, and they put their own flag on top of it. It's insane. Couple of comments from Lady Zaga. Stolen valor. Yeah, it's the first time I've seen this propaganda, which I love that. By the way, I've never heard that. That's really funny. Look at the original meaning of blue line, and yeah, I would need to look that up. But this is what's happening out there. The cops are saying that they are the ones who are really in responsible for keeping order, keeping chaos at bay, when in reality there is a total American right to protest. 100%. It's in the First Amendment. Let's get over there. All right, I want to get to that because, we've seen enough of the cop propaganda. All right, let's dive into the foundation. So where does this stuff come from, right? So a lot of people are now kind of concerned about riots and protesting. Is it okay to revolt? Is it okay to rebel? Can you have a revolution? How does that work? And this is not the first time that we've seen something like this in human history. It's just not. We've seen a lot of it before. I already kind of touched upon it a little bit previously, but in the United States, we had the American Revolution, okay? And in our mind, because we're Americans, this was a good thing. We were breaking away from the tyranny, from the oppression of Great Britain, and we were seeking a new sense of liberty, our own rights in America. And that worked out well for us, according to most people. There are still people who, of course, are going to criticize anything that happened in America. They're going to say it was founded by a bunch of white guys with slaves, and therefore America has an original sin on it. I can certainly understand that argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it is an argument that people have. And so, the argument being that the American way of working is no good because of that original sin. So I understand that, but at the same time, we live in America. This is our system. And I want to talk a little bit more about what it was founded upon. Why did it come into being? There are other ways that you can have a bad rebellion, a bad revolution. And it's kind of like the one we saw in China for the Maoist revolution. By many estimates, there are about 60 million people who I think died as a result of the starvation and the Great Leap and all of that stuff. So there's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. And today I want to talk to you about where this all comes from. So when we look at criminal law, we look at statutes. When we look at how to interpret those statutes, we look at case law. So we've already done that. Now we're talking about a bigger concept, one that sort of underlies the entire existence of our country. We're talking specifically about the creation of a society. We're talking about coming out of a state of war and into an organized society. And a lot of this stuff, if you have read any history, it didn't exist at one point. Okay, when we're talking about democracy and republics, and we're talking about social contract and consent of the governed, and a lot of the principles that you read in our Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, in your history books, in your civics classes, at some point it didn't exist. People had to reason into this. They had to think their way into it. And for the United States, a lot of this started out of the Enlightenment era over in Europe. And it started with this guy. This guy's named John Locke. Okay, John Locke, he's a philosopher, a political thinker, and he wrote a treatise, two treatises on government that laid out the foundation for a lot of what we've built American society around. So you've heard the phrase life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is right in our founding documents. This guy, John Locke, sort of originally created that. He said life, liberty, and property. And we're going to talk about that here quickly. But the idea is there's a lot of concepts that came out of the Enlightenment area, the Enlightenment time in Europe, and they're very applicable to what we're talking about today in terms of revolution and revolt and throwing out illegitimate governments. So how does it work? Well, here's what John Locke actually explains. And he wrote this in the two treatises of government. Very old text, very hard to read, but largely this is what it means. And this took me back to my political science days during my undergrad before law school. So here's what John Locke is talking about. He says that mankind, when we emerge into the world, so let's take a blank slate. We're taking everything off. When we emerge into the world, we enter into what he calls a state of war. It's a state of war. We're all in existence. There's very little out there. There's no structure. And basically, when we're bumping around, walking into each other, we can kill each other. We can steal. We can murder. We can rape. We can do whatever we want. We're in a state of war. And that's us. We're walking around. We are alive. We're born. And we enter into this state of war. And we want to get out of this state of war. So naturally, what happens? We go through a progression. So as we're existing and bumping into each other in this chaotic kind of hypothetical that we're discussing, we look and we find other resources. So as men and women in the world, we come upon other resources, and what we want to do is utilize those resources to our advantage. And so we mix our labor, we mix what we do as people, our life, with those resources. And what do we create? We create property. So we are turning those resources through our own blood, our own toil. We turn that into property. And once we do that, we now have property rights. Okay, we've taken a portion of our life. Every time you go into work, every single day, you're trading a portion of your life for something else, whether you realize that or not. This is why I have such a huge problem with taxes. When you go into work and you work for 8 hours and you get paid, $12 an hour, whatever you make, you are exchanging your life for that money. You're exchanging. So in John Locke's hypothetical situation, you're going out there and you're tilling the land, you're planting seeds, you are cultivating it, you're chopping down trees and building houses and building property. Because you've exchanged some of your life for that, you have rights to that. You have property rights, and it's fundamental. It's not just a vague idea that just sounds good. Those are rights. Those are fundamental rights because you've exchanged your life for that. So it's as valuable as it is your own life, in a sense. So it's very important. So he says life, liberty, and property. You need life to exist. You need the liberty to go out and exchange resources and build things and do things. And then you need property rights in order to protect that. All right, so let's go back to John Locke's situation. We exist in the state of war. We start creating some property, and we want to engage in relationships with one another. So now we want to build these different relationships between our neighbors. And the reason being is we don't want our neighbors to steal our stuff. We don't want people to interfere with our life. We don't want them to kill us. We don't want them to come over and rob our farms. So we enter into this agreement, and it's kind of a societal compact. And we say, we're going to create more order. We want to come out of the state of war, and we want to come into an orderly world where we can exist. And we agree that there is going to be an overarching government that is going to help ensure that we have some safety, some order. So it's agreed upon. So the people down here with their property rights, with their life, with their liberty, they are entering a social contract that they're going to put this government over all of us. And they're going to govern, the government is going to govern with our consent, with the consent of the people. We agree that this government is legitimate because we have a social contract with them. We grant them the ability to govern, and they govern with the ability, with our consent. So this is radical at the time. This sounds super obvious right now. I'm going through this and I'm like, well, does anybody not know this? This is new. This is novel stuff at the time during the Enlightenment era. Up until this point in human history, most people were still under the impression that we're ruled by kings and queens, and they have to follow a sacred bloodline. So as this continues to develop and we start talking about consent, this is a radical change for many people. And so what we're seeing now is we have a government that maybe is less legitimate than it otherwise should be. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot of grievances with our government. That is leading to the protests. That's leading to the riots. There's a lot of displeasure. And so when the government loses the consent of the people, when these relationships break down and we can no longer say that the government is governing with our consent, that's a very, very big problem. And John Locke, who's one of the influences for the American founders, says when that happens, the people have a legitimate reason. They have a legitimate basis to get rid of that illegitimate government. So you can exchange that. You take that old government, you get rid of it, you bring in a new government, and you reestablish the connection with the people. You reestablish the consent. We now have a new government, we have new consent, we have a new social contract. And John Locke says this is totally legitimate. Totally. You're allowed, this is good. This is right. This is what people should do. When your government becomes overbearing, when they become authoritarian, tyrannical, when they're stamping and stomping on your rights, you have a legitimate reason, almost a duty, almost a moral obligation to get rid of that government, to get rid of it. And this was all taking place. This was conversations that were happening before the founding of our country. And what happened was many of our founding fathers incorporated a lot of these principles into our Constitution. So John Locke says, Well, this is a big deal. Anytime you move a government, one government out of the other, you take one government and throw it out and you bring in a new government, man, that is really traumatic. There's going to be a lot of turmoil. There's going to be a lot of chaos. The whole power structure is going to change. And that's not ideal. So what do we want to do? How do we make sure that we can build in these different safety valves or these pressure valves to release or to modify our government or to change it to make sure that it stays representative of the American people, so that it stays representative of our society, so that we don't lose consent of the governed, and so that we can continue to function and grow and amend our Constitution and do all sorts of things. So the founders took that very seriously. They took it into deep consideration, and they constructed a government with 3 co-equal branches. You've got the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. And in our Constitution, the very, very First Amendment, which is in the Bill of Rights, they lay out some of our most fundamental, most treasured freedoms that we need to revisit, especially in a time when there's a little bit of chaos in the world. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. We all know that one. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to assemble. But we also have, which many people forget about, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, this is huge. We have the right to peaceably assemble, which is what I'm seeing a lot of. You have an absolute right. It's right in the First Amendment. Go peaceably assemble. That's being stamped on by a lot of our law enforcement officials that we're seeing out there. We've got these curfews that, in my mind, are largely unlawful, that are being used as a pretext to arrest protesters who are just protesting according to the First Amendment, the right to peaceably assemble. And then finally, the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. That means if you've got a problem, you can go petition the government for a redress of grievances. You can go complain to the government, and they have a responsibility to do something with it. If they don't do anything with it, they're going to lose the consent of the people. They're going to lose the right. That social contract is going to be eviscerated, and that government is now going to become illegitimate, and we have to replace it. So the First Amendment is saying you have a right to petition for a redress of grievances. It's the First Amendment, the first, number one. It's protected by number 2, which says if your government doesn't address your grievances, if they don't respond to that petition, you have the Second Amendment. And when it becomes time to throw out that government, to make that swap, you now have firearms and you can protect yourself and you can sort of create your own safety because your government has become illegitimate. It's become unlawful. It's no longer governing with the consent of the people, so we have to get rid of it. So the U.S. Constitution specifically, and the way that a lot of our governing bodies have evolved over the years, we have a ton of these options. We have a ton of abilities to petition our government for a redress of grievances. Here are some of them. You can vote for local officials, city council. You can appoint, the city council appoints a lot of local police chiefs. You can vote for a lot of the times judges, state officials, local representatives, local senators, governors. We vote for attorney generals. We vote to keep or leave judges. We vote for treasurers, corporation commissioners. If you think it's a school problem, you can change your superintendents. We vote for federal officials, state representatives, senators, president. We have the freedom of speech. We have the freedom to write, blog. We have the right to make video. We can organize. We can fundraise. And if you don't like any of it, you can run for office yourself. So we have a lot of these different options, a lot of these different escape valves for people to go and do something about it, which is great, right? This is what prevents us from having these major revolutions every couple decades, because if we didn't have the ability to change or to elect new people or to pass new laws or to even make amendments to the Constitution, we would just turn into a boiler cooker. Everybody would get so mad, and we would have to throw out the illegitimate government. Unfortunately, I don't think that we're there quite yet. And so my sort of main question is, where are we right now? What are we doing? Okay, we've spent this entire show talking about sort of the development of this and where these protests are going. And so, where are we at? Is anybody in the protests? Do we know whether or not they are using any of these escape valves? Do we know? Are there any really proposed solutions from anybody involved. Antifa, Black Lives Matter. I've heard that there are white supremacists out there. I don't know if they've ever confirmed that or taken ownership of that. Is it the cops who are pissed off and causing all of these problems? Are they the ones who want to see some more representation or something? What is everybody upset about? What does everybody want? And how can we stop this chaos and return more to order, but not just order for the sake of order, not just order because the police don't want anybody protesting, order because the government is hearing our claims. The government is saying, yeah, we get it. There is a lot of problems here in our justice system. We do agree that there are some major disparities between different communities in terms of policing. We understand that the prison population is overly disproportional. It's overly representative of one particular segment of our society. If they're hearing us and they're caught and they're a legitimate government, then they're going to respond. And so there are a lot of different things that we can do to help release this pressure cooker, but I haven't seen a lot of that from a lot of the parties who are involved in the ongoing protests. Lady Zaga also says you can vote for clerk of the court, which is true. You can vote for clerk of the court. There's a lot of ways that we can get involved to move the ball forward. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to burn each other's businesses down. So here's something that we've been seeing. We've got a lot of people today. This came actually from our home state. My business partner took a picture of this vehicle this morning. No justice, no peace, which is a very broad term. I don't really know what that means. I don't know if there's a policy proposal behind that. I'd like a little bit more specifics, but of course you can't put the specifics on the back of your windshield. But my point is, what are we looking for? What do we want out of this? Now we're seeing that there is all four officers are being charged with crimes. Is that justice? And do we get peace now? Or what does that mean? What is the bigger conversation of justice? What else do we need to do? Okay, here's another video of what I was talking about: the right to peacefully protest, the right to peacefully assemble, the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. We just covered those. They're in the First Amendment. But what are the police? What are they doing? Are they honoring that?
Could have been an innocent cop. I feel the pain. We're all scared. Black, white, cop, doesn't matter. We're all scared. We're living in fear. You gotta stop living in fear. I am not your enemy. You are not my enemy. We have to share this land no matter what. By the end of the day, we have to share this land no matter what. I'm a good day.
All right, so they're all out there. They're peacefully protesting. Doesn't look like it's after hours, and they're sitting there. They have a right, in my mind, as far as I know, to be there.
Come on, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Fuck you! What the fuck do you do?
Are you fucking kidding me?
For what? For what?
Freedom of speech! No!
Yeah, so that obviously is not good. That is the police doing something that is entirely illegitimate. That is 100% in violation of basically everything that the United States stands for. So on the one hand, we've got some justice because we have people who are now going to be held accountable for George Floyd's death. But at the same time, we are still sorely lacking in justice because of what we're seeing the police do still on an ongoing basis. Those people were out there in the middle of the park, it looks like, and they're just being totally peaceful. They're not causing any damage. They're not causing any destruction at all. And they're getting arrested for that. So highly, highly problematic. Let me also give you a couple quick action items for some potential solutions, and then I want to run through some things that we can do. So here is some information that Miss Faith pulled from our office. So here are some numbers that you can call and text. So these are action-oriented ways that you can respond back out to your government, right? You can call, you can text justice to 668-366. You can call the mayor, you can call the attorney. People are setting up these different organizations and these different places where you can donate. Campaign Zero, Black Visions Collectives, National Bailout, Justice for Breonna. I covered Breonna on this channel actually before a lot of this stuff started. Another horrific situation, Minnesota Freedom Fund, George Floyd Memorial Fund, and so on and so forth. So, there are things that you can do. Here's a couple more of them, ways to petition. 10 organizations to follow. If you're on Twitter or any of those, Facebook or any of those groups, get on there. 7 petitions to sign. So you can sign a bunch of petitions demanding justice and those sorts of things. And finally, you can do these things. Of course, register to vote, right? Check on your friends, educate yourself, advocate for mental health, read the news, so on and so forth. And all of those are great, but I don't know what we actually want. I appreciate that. I appreciate awareness. I think more people should be involved in this conversation. I want more people to be talking about these issues. But what does this mean? What do we want here? Advocate for mental health, choose action over inaction, be an ally at the dinner table, create a long-term strategy. What does that even mean? What does that stuff mean? I don't know. I don't know what that means because it's so broad. I understand awareness. I'm very happy about awareness, but concrete, what do we want? I've got some propositions that we can run through here quickly, but by and large, what I'm seeing right now is that we have returned to a state of war in large part. This is what it looks like. Things are burning, things are on fire. This is not a good situation. The pressure cookers that we've been seeing are exploding, and we're seeing, really tragic things happen. This was this officer who was shot and killed. His name was David Dorn. He was 77 years old, shot over TVs. Okay, we've probably all seen the video, and it's. I know. Look, I'm more angry at the police. I built an entire business around the police. We have 7 lawyers here who and a whole team of support people. We've got a whole team of people here who our job is to push back against the police on a daily basis in court. Doesn't mean that we want them to be shot and killed and murdered. We do not want that at all. We want anything but that. That makes our job harder. That makes the clients we represent, that makes the people that we help, it makes their lives harder. We want less division. We want less killing. We want to embody better principles. The reason why the entire country was so mad about George Floyd is because what we saw was an imbalance of power. We saw somebody get killed who didn't deserve to get killed at the expense of another person, of another entity, of another system. It repulsed us to the core. We were disgusted. We couldn't believe what we had seen happen there. But to turn around and turn a blind eye to this other stuff happening, we saw something happen to somebody who it shouldn't have happened to. It was very bad. We're seeing that going the other direction, and that does not serve our cause. That does not serve criminal justice reform. It does not help bridge the gap. It is a huge problem. In fact, I think it's actually doing more harm than good in the long run, because what a lot of people are seeing are their properties being burnt down, are their stores being looted, and their friends and family being killed. And we're not talking about what do we need to do to resolve this pressure? What do we need to do? How do we need to change? How can we petition our government for a redress of grievances so that we as a community can come together and actually live in our world, live in a world that we want to live in a society that is more fair, that is more equal, that prevents these types of tragedies from happening. And so what I would encourage, anybody who's on this show, anybody who's watching the channel, just think about it in that context. What can we actually do that's going to move the ball forward on the criminal justice issues, right? And I've got a couple kind of broad solutions that I just jotted down. Of course, number one is to vote, right? Nobody should be not voting. Everybody needs to vote. But how about some of these other ones? Why don't we just get rid of police unions? How about just get rid of the police unions? Okay, the police unions protect their own more than any other organization that exists out there. Every time an officer even gets reprimanded, the union is right there. They're fighting for them. This is a big part of the reason why the police officers are not ever held accountable, because their union is so powerful that they can just dictate what happens internally. It's a huge problem. We have one in Arizona that's a disaster. There's They're all across the country, but the police unions are very, 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 very bad in my opinion. So I say ban them, or we reform them. Okay, another big one that we're seeing some action on: end qualified immunity. I just did an interview with a guy named Scott Griffiths, it's on our channel. We recorded this interview before these protests broke out. But qualified immunity is what protects these cops. They can do something wrong, but they're immune for that illegal activity because of the fact that they are an officer. So if we can end qualified immunity or reform it, there is I think it's a Senator Justin Amash who actually introduced a new bill or something like that to end qualified immunity, and I would 100% support that. How about a national database for Brady violations? A national database for Brady violators. Might that be helpful? So in Arizona, this is across the country, but when an officer gets in trouble or does something that the defense should know about, the Supreme Court has said that the prosecutor's office, the government, has a duty to tell the defense about that. It's a Brady violation is what we kind of use them in legal parlance. But basically what it's saying is that when the cops do something, when they violate something, we should all know about it. What ends up happening, practically speaking, many cops never make the list in Arizona. My understanding is that the way that the prosecutor's offices are running it is they just email spreadsheets across to everybody. So one person will update one spreadsheet and they'll email it over to another prosecutor, maybe has her own updates, and all these different versions of these different Brady lists floating around all the different offices with no uniformity between them. And then what happens in addition to that is officers that do something bad, prosecutors and judges and everybody can say, well, it wasn't that bad, so we're not going to actually put them on the Brady list. So they're just going to say, we don't think that they deserve to be on there. And we're not going to tell the defense about any of that misconduct or that malfeasance because we've decided they're not going to need to be on that list. Well, we don't trust you people to make those decisions anymore. Okay, the defense needs that information. We'll be the ones to decide whether or not we can comment on that in trial, whether or not that's going to be impactful on our case, on our client, on our defense. We're not going to just take your word for it. How about that? So we create a national database, or at least a statewide basis. I think it should be national actually, because these cops will move states. So they'll move from one state to another, and they'll just get a new job at that other location. So it'd be something I would like to see. How about independent civil review boards? Could we do independent civil review boards? So in other words, we have a new body, a new legislative body that is set up. It's staffed by citizens, and those people then can go around and review all of the different police departments. They can maintain some of these Brady lists. They can act as an independent check on the police department, right? How about we get reviews by the attorney general's offices? So what about the attorneys? What about if the attorney generals just went through and did an audit on all the different police departments around their local states? Maybe they're governed by the United States Attorney General. Maybe we have a review of all these different departments. One of the things that I would really like to know more about is why are these officers really standing down a lot? In the early parts of the protests, we saw a lot of these cops standing down, and they were standing down according to orders. They were standing down according to Mayor Bill de Blasio, I think, told them to stand down. There's a lot of that going on. I would really like to know what the story is behind all of that. Why are these cops who are paid to go and protect basically this type of work, right? They're supposed to go out there, stop people from burning stuff, stop rioters and all those things. They're very accustomed to just typically writing traffic tickets and stopping people for speeding. But now it's time to actually work, guys. You need to go out there and help restore some order to some of these things. Why were they standing down? Why do we see video of them dropping bricks off, or we see videos of guys who look like cops throwing incendiaries into trash cans and stuff? Why are the cops contributing to some of this? Were those orders anywhere? Did anybody give them those directions? Where did that come from? So maybe the attorney general's offices need to look and actually determine what happened here. Maybe that would be a good place to start. How about body cams for everybody? How about we buy body cams for every single cop in the entire country, and it's now mandatory that you wear your body cams? And maybe we put those on a public database somewhere too. Maybe we make it accessible to defense attorneys so we can review, we can spot check a lot of these body cameras, and we can see the malfeasance, and we can point out bad cops. Let the public do some policing on them. Why is it that if I get a bad case outcome, somebody can go and leave a bad review for me or for my firm, or if I do something unethical or unlawful, they can go file a bar complaint with the Arizona State Bar. The public can reprimand me. A business owner, anybody with a restaurant, if they make you a bad hamburger, you can go on Yelp and leave them a review. You can go, blast that person for that. There's no accountability for police. There's no accountability for law enforcement. Most of the articles about any police malfeasance or police misconduct, they release it, and it's all just about, it has no names. We don't have any follow-up. We don't know about any discipline. We don't know if that officer's been sanctioned. We don't know anything about the discipline that's taking place, about policing the police officers. Maybe we should watch the Watchers, which of course is the name of this show, right? There are many things that we can be doing. We can have a constitutional convention. We can pass amendments. We can do anything, but not burn people's buildings down, not kill each other over this stuff. There's a lot that we can do. So what I'm encouraging everybody here to do is think about that. What do we want? What do we want out of this? Let's put together a plan. Let's start working around what a real solution looks like. I think it starts with justice. I think it looks like seeing those officers get charged for what they did, and we're going to follow that case through it. But it is something that is going to be an ongoing conversation. And speaking of conversation, let's run through the chat and see what we've got here. All right, so we have a spammer, it looks like, who is, advocating some really bad stuff. We're going to go ahead and block that person, so they are out of here. Anytime you come on this channel and you're actually advocating for the death of cops or anybody, for that matter, there's no place for you on this channel. Okay, we don't want anybody to go out and commit more violence. We want less violence. We want more justice, less violence. The more violence there is, the more injustice there is. It's just how it is. All right, so a couple things here. Good looking honky, which is a great name, says great stream. Thanks. Luis Rodriguez gets murdered. 4 cops in front of his wife and daughter. DA did nothing. Yeah, there's a lot of that. It's going to continue on. You got 3 cops from their cruiser with the cop. Okay, some typos there. But it is, this is something that, of course, is happening all over the place. Cops are killing people all over the place. Black people, white people, Asian people, just deaths across the board. So that is absolutely happening. Do you think we could possibly go for murder 1 in George Floyd case? And I answered that previously, but again, the answer is no on that. I do not think they're going to go for that for George Floyd for murder 1. I don't think it exists. Murder 1, premeditation. I didn't see any premeditation in any of the facts. Pants up, don't loot. Yeah, cops need to stay at the police station until they get called. The fire department doesn't go out in the streets looking for car accidents or fires. Yeah, that's a great point. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing the cops out there preemptively wiping out these protesters, and they're imposing these different curfew violations, and they're barricading things. There's pictures on Twitter of people who are saying that they just want to go home. They're trying to get back into the subway. They're trying to leave a particular street, but the cops have everything barricaded up, so they just can't get out. So the cops are showing up, closing things off, waiting for curfew to strike. Then they're going and arresting everybody for curfew violations. So yeah, I mean, what are the police doing? Are they helping, or are they contributing to the problem? I played a video here on this show of many, many instances of police really doing some egregious things. So that is not good. All right. So again, stolen valor, propaganda. Term began. Okay, so explanation of what the blue line means. The term began as an allusion to the famous thin red line when a British infantry regiment held off a Russian cavalry charge during the Crimean War in 1854, where red was referred to the color of British uniforms. The blue in thin blue line refers to the blue color of the uniforms of many police departments. The original blue line flag is black with a blue line through it, and that comes from Lady Zaga, which is very interesting. Yeah, I didn't know the history of that. It is something, I see a lot of my friends on the social medias, the people who support the cops, who always change their profile pictures to the thin blue line anytime a cop dies. So it's good to have a little bit of backstory there. Let's see. Okay, don't know what that comment is. Something is wrong with the judicial system. Absolutely. Do you know that the percentage of inmates who pleaded guilty is ridiculously high because people can't afford representation? And that is absolutely true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. This is part of the system. So this is built into the system. This is a big problem with keeping people in custody without bond, or by requiring them to post a high bond. I can do a whole show on bond and bond problems. But basically what they'll do is they'll bring people into custody and they'll say, look, we'll let you out, but you got to post a bond of $5,000. I don't have $5,000. Okay, that's no problem. All you have to do is just plead guilty right here. And then what? Well, and then we'll let you go. Yeah, you already spent a day, 2 days in jail. Yeah, so you just plead guilty and we'll let you go. They go, oh, wait, I can get out if I just plead guilty? I get out of jail? Yeah, that's it. There you go. All right. And then that person has a criminal record that follows them around forever. Now, if that person wants to wait and they say, nah, I didn't do that, I'm not going to plead guilty, they're going to sit in custody until they either post the bond, a judge modifies that bond, so they got to go file a motion or talk to the judge and ask them to modify that, or they then have to go hire an attorney, or they have to find a family member to post the bond for them. So they just sign, yep, sure, guilty. And that's going to follow them around for the rest of their lives. And, it's not good. Happens every day. People plead guilty to crimes they didn't do every day, which is why when people are sort of hemming and hawing about General Flynn, well, he pled guilty, which means he did it. Not really. I mean, it really doesn't. People plead guilty to crimes all the time, every day. It's something that's just common for what we do. All right. So some other comments. Another demand to remove qualified immunity. Agree with that. Upset the police unions have more power than lawmakers and politicians. That comes from MZ Williams, which is so true. I mean, it's amazing. I would encourage people to check this out. If you go on your Facebook or your Twitter or something, you can probably find your local police union. And I would follow them, and I would go get invited to their group, just see what they do. I do it here. And you'll be surprised at how much language they use that is 100% us versus them. Cops versus civilians. Heroes versus animals versus the peasants. You know, they are talking about the rest of us in a way that is not good. And I've only seen it really with the police unions. They're a lot more confident behind closed doors. They know that they're operating in sort of an echo chamber. They have a lot of sycophants, people who just, will bend over and do whatever they want for law enforcement, who follow them. And so they get this little echo chamber going, and it snowballs, and you start to see some pretty gruesome stuff that's going on in there. Abolish police unions. Yep. What are the odds Chauvin walks? Are there any public thinkers arguing that he will? So great question. I don't know of anybody who is arguing that he will walk. I think that the political pressures are way too high right now to sort of allow that to happen. But let's fast forward a year from now. Okay, these cases last years, sometimes 2 years. Is the public still going to be clamoring that he is found guilty? I don't know. I think that there is going to be a good argument for, and I'm going to go into this. I think my next video, maybe next week, I'll talk about, depending on what's happening, about the autopsy reports, right? We had 2 autopsy reports, one from the government, one from an independent examiner who did their review on behalf of the family's request. I think from a defense perspective, what I would do if I were representing these cops is hang my hat on the drugs, hang it right on the drugs, talk about the fentanyl, talk about the methamphetamines, talk about George Floyd's sort of pre-existing conditions. I think it's a pretty bad argument because there's a principle in the law called the eggshell skull rule. The eggshell skull rule basically says that you have to take your victim as you find them. This is sort of the catchphrase that we use in law. Take your victim as you find them. So let's say, for example, that you go out and you're at a bar and you get into a fight with somebody and you're in the wrong. Okay, you're just mouthing words and you've had a little too much to drink and you decide you're just going to pop off and pop this guy right in the jaw. Okay, he deserves it. If you got hit that way, you'd probably be fine. Maybe have a concussion or something. Maybe not a big deal. And you'll be fine. You wake up, have a headache, take some Advil, get back to your life. Probably 99.9% of other people, that would be the same result of hitting them in the face. Okay. But on this particular night, you hit the wrong person. He looked normal, looked like you or I, but he had a weird condition in his brain that you didn't know about. And when you hit him, he died. He just died instantly because something happened. He had something going on in his head. Now he is dead. Okay. that does not relieve you of liability. The fact that he had that underlying condition doesn't mean that you get off scot-free. You take him as you find him. If he's got that condition and you hit him and killed him, you're responsible for the death. You don't get to use the fact that there was something else going on as an excuse. So that's what I think the defense is going to, that's what the counter is going to be to the defense saying that, well, he was just a drug addict. He was high on drugs. The drug is a big problem, right? Fentanyl is a big problem. You take that drug, your body sort of shuts off to a certain extent. And so there's a good argument to be made that had he not been high on fentanyl, maybe he would not have died. He could have had his neck on there, but he could have manipulated his neck. What happens is when you're getting crushed, your windpipe, your esophagus, everything just crushes and you can't breathe. Now, if you're conscious, you can, for 8 or 9 minutes, you could absolutely kind of keep your neck open so that you could get some air in and out of there. He passed out. The cops are going to claim it was because of the fentanyl. That's what made him black out. It wasn't the fact that he had an officer's knee on his neck for 9 minutes that did it. It was the fentanyl. So they're going to try to break up. They're going to draw a fork in the road there, and they're going to say, no, yeah, he probably shouldn't have been putting his knee on his neck, but that's not what actually resulted in him dying. It was partial asphyxiation back. So when I was talking about the dominoes, they're just going to go back in the dominoes. They're going to find something earlier. They're going to hang their hat on that, and they're going to say, no, the cop didn't cause the death. The death was caused by the drugs. And drugs are very shiny. It's a very shiny object. So when they start flashing that around in front of the juror, they're going to drugs. This guy was a criminal. This guy was a drug addict. This guy has a long rap sheet. And this guy was a big problem. But the cops didn't kill him. It was the drugs that killed him. So that's going to be their argument. I don't think it's a good argument, but I think that's what they're going to try to hang their hat on. What are the odds that Chauvin walks? I already got that one. Second Amendment comes in. Yep, to protect the first one. Police officers should be changed to peace officers. Funny how firefighters, EMTs, paramedics are first responders who don't assassinate citizens. Yeah, it is funny, right? It is funny that that's not happening with them. Wonder why that is. Yeah, I do get the sense. So we do a lot of work with police officers directly. We interview them in cases, and we see them in court. We see them at trials. And a lot of these guys, they are not peace officers at all. They are not. They do not want to be police officers. They are peace officers. They never want to be peace officers. They are out there because they are young and they are hungry and they want action. They want adrenaline. They want to rough people up. They want to go out and smash and break things. Many cops can be hired at like age 21. These guys don't know what they're doing with their lives, and they get some basic training, and they go out there and they just want to mess things up. Okay, they're just as bad as any of the protesters out there. They want to break things and hurt people, and so the idea that they're going to be peace officers is just, I don't think it's even realistic at all. Many of these guys sort of act like they are in the middle of a war zone, in the Middle East or something. They're in civilian society. They're in everyday civil society, but they're acting like they're in a war zone. And as I mentioned previously, when you go through a lot of these other police union web pages and things, you're going to see there that they act and they talk like that. We see it on the streets. We see them actually talking about it and thinking about it behind closed doors as well. Texas Iguana says, notice how the person they arrested is black. Absolutely. I did notice that. And I guess you can draw your own conclusions from that. Excuse me. I hope this message registers and they get to hear by police, because these criminals and others not show, I don't know what that means, not show are dangerous. Rob, what do you think about all of a sudden Floyd's criminal past is coming up? Why do police feel that crap is even necessary and is even admissible in court? Great question. That comes from Glenn Johnson. And Glenn, this is par for the course. This is what happens every time that the police screw up. They go back and they try to dig up history and justify their misconduct. We saw this. I went through it in detail in the Ahmaud Arbery case. We saw, we started to see actually the body cam footage from previous arrests. In Ahmaud's case, we saw shoplifting charge outside of a department store. We saw him getting stopped by the officers who were kind of harassing him in the middle. They actually tried to tase him, but failed in that. This is just what they do. They just parade out all of these other types of crimes. A lot of those criminal charges are not going to be relevant in this particular case. what I mean is relevant in court. It's not going to become admissible into court. You can't use kind of prior bad acts in many situations to prove that a person is likely to commit another prior bad act. It's called there's a lot of exceptions to that. So basically, like for motive, intent, and other things, it's complicated legal law. But for our purposes, it's not admissible into court, but it is admissible into the court of public opinion. That means you or I can see it. You or I can have a conversation about it. And so if they can beat this drum long enough and loud enough and say, George Floyd was a drug addict, George Floyd was a criminal, George Floyd was a derelict of society, and they can beat that into the minds of the public enough, when they impanel a jury, those people's minds are going to be preconditioned, right? It's just like seeing the same, pharmaceutical commercial, right? Eventually, you know the jingle. Hey, I know that. And you're going to get that jingle in your mind. And so they're going to try to influence the decision, the outcome of the case before you even step foot into court. And so a lot of the battle at the very beginning of the case is to determine, what have you heard? What are your opinions on this? We go through a process called voir dire with the jury. What do you know? What have you heard? What are your opinions? Can you be unreasonable? Can you be reasonable? Can you be unbiased? Do you have any, preconceived notions about this case? It's very long, very detailed line of questioning, because we want to make sure that we have the right jurors. We want to make sure we have people that haven't been already prejudiced by what a lot of we're seeing in the media. Great question, though. Great question. MZ Williams, strong charges, stiffer penalty for police officers who murder the community. Yep. Hernan Alcaraz, these criminals are not defeated by intelligence services and say people are stupid and not understand and don't see bad persons. Okay. I don't know what that means. But that may be a language barrier. So I didn't mean to be flippant about that. They kill more often. They do kill a lot. Chicago convicted their very first cop for murder last year. Yeah, we've had some cases in Arizona that came from Lady Gaga. We've seen some cases in Arizona where it's very clearly murder. I'm talking about a cop named Phil Brailsford, by the way, who actually shot a guy, in my mind, in murder, cold blood, no justification for it. He got away with murder. The Mesa Police Department actually rehired him after he got acquitted of the murder so that he could get his pension before he was let go. And so that guy's going to be collecting his pension for the rest of its valid lifetime. Very, 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 very gross stuff. Nobody feels sorry for these psychopaths wearing a badge. So yeah, Hernan, it is, I think, a language barrier. Give them mental health evaluations. Probably not a bad idea either. Many cops were involved in covering up, were charged and found not guilty. They all got fired later. Mental health evaluations. Yep. No police union sounds good. 3 strikes. Get 3 offenses on the citizens. Get your badge taken permanently. No switching departments. No more thrill kills. I would be 100% behind that. This is part of the reason I started this entire show. That comment comes from MZ Williams. Part of the reason I started this entire show was based on that premise. The premise is cops, they get disciplined, but nobody ever holds them accountable. They'll go on paid leave, administrative leave. They'll go to a different county. So in Arizona, they'll go from Maricopa County over to Pinal County. They'll go over to a different state in New Mexico or some other place. They'll resign in lieu of being fired. So now they've got a resignation on their record, not a termination on their record, which makes them eligible. They keep their standards. They keep their AZ Post certification. They just go get a job somewhere else. Then once everything blows over, they come on back. That's why I didn't have a slide on it today, but Derek Chauvin, my understanding is he had like 19 different complaints against him, 17, 19. Many of them were unfounded or unsustained or whatever, but he had a lot of them. He had a lot of history. In other words, there's smoke where there's fire, or where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Okay, so that's what was going on with him, and certainly more could have been done to wean out these bad popo, these bad cops. People want different things. This comes from Zulu Zeit. People want different things in different degrees. Others will defend the status quo at any cost. There are never enough people rowing the same direction at the same time. Yeah, and I it's a great point. It's a great comment. And that's why I kind of started the show when I was explaining that I'm very happy that we're having this conversation, but I'm a little disappointed in how that conversation is being had. For the first time in a long time, right on that Monday or Tuesday, right after George Floyd was murdered, I have never seen sort of a sense of unity in the country in terms of criminal justice reform. People were disgusted by what they saw. Everybody was rowing the same direction, to use your language. Everybody was angry about it. Everybody was pissed. Everybody wanted justice. Nobody watched that and said, yeah, but those cops, everybody was disgusted. It's a little different than the Ahmaud Arbery case. Okay, in Ahmaud's case, people were pretty evenly split, kind of split 50-50. People were saying, no, it was justified. He was a burglar. The other half were saying he was just jogging on the streets. He was murdered in cold blood. That was more 50-50. This case was, at first, completely unified. The whole country was rowing the same direction. Then it got bad. Then the movement got infiltrated. We start seeing bad actors. The police start responding. They start instigating. Now the politicians have to get involved. So they start aligning. Then other people want to jump into the conversation. We got Antifa. We've got, who knows who else is now sort of co-opting this movement. And then when we start to see buildings being burned down and innocent people being shot and killed, yeah, now we're not going to be rowing in the same direction anymore. Now, a lot of the people who were on that journey were all sailing towards the same direction. They said, we're done. We're abandoning ship. We are not interested in being part of that team anymore, which is really unfortunate. I was really thrilled that everybody was going to be rowing in the same direction, but now doesn't seem to be that way. I'm hoping we can start to kind of salvage a little bit of this. This has not been going on that long, okay? For all deference to kind of the movement. This is very new. This is a very new movement. It's been going on for like 10 days. So it will take some time to get organized. It will take some time to put together some policy proposals. I am not the person to lead that charge, of course. There are many highly qualified people, but I would like to see some more leadership, really. I would like to see some more leadership on this thing. What does Black Lives Matter? What do they want in terms of policy prescriptions? What is their platform? What do they want to see so that we can start acting on it? I'm standing here. I'm telling you, I'm sitting here right now in my office saying, I want to help. You let me know. I am not an African-American man. I don't know specifically how it is in your community, but I do want justice reform. I know what the justice system is like. I know how angry I am about it, how angry our clients are, how angry my entire team is about a lot of the things that we see. We have attorneys come back from court and we sit in an office and just talk shop for hours about all of the misconduct, all of the egregious bullshit that we see on a daily basis with police, with prosecutors, with judges, with everybody involved in the system. So we are ready to help. And any of those policy proposals I outlined, I think anything is a move in the right direction. So let's just get some leadership and we're on board. No question about that. All right, had a spammer, remove that. They can count on your laziness and short attention span. It's easy to chop necks when they're stuck out one by one. LA Sheriff Department, the largest police force in the world, don't have body cams. I did not know that, actually. I did not know that. I don't know if that's a policy-wide, a department-wide thing or what it is. But hello, we just spent trillions of dollars on coronavirus. We're probably going to be in the trillions of dollars of damage here soon enough if we don't solve this problem. So can we cut a check for some body cams? Can we find some money for some body cameras? How much are these things? Really? Can our government say we're going to mandate that every single police officer who's doing any type of public-facing activities has to wear a body camera? We'll pay for it. Okay? I hate taxes because it gets spent stupidly. How about we just use it a little bit better and just buy body cameras? Why has that not already happened? Why has it not already happened? I'm going to guess. I don't know about LA specifically, but I'm going to guess they have a pretty strong union that doesn't want them. That's why it's not happening. Thanks for the time listening to my message. I hope I get listening to find justice. Okay. Cops and CPS steal kids. Okay, I booted that guy out. End police unions. Hold insurance companies accountable for insuring killer cops. Yeah, insurance is a very, very interesting thing. Okay, we got a lot of comments rolling in now. Let's see what we've got. I'm in Toronto in Ontario. We have the Office of Independent Police Review for the Ontario Provincial Police, which would be like the state police in the U.S. Yeah, you have an Office of Independent Police Review. Does that not make sense to anybody? Why don't we already have these? Why don't we already have these things? I don't know. Problem is, within the communities, need to teach respect. Cops need to be held accountable, but you're always going to have conflict if you instigate it. Yeah, and I think the cops are instigating a lot of it. How do you get around unions to implement these much needed changes? It's a great question. And I mean, basically, you know, I don't have a union. I do what I do. You know, I know a lot of nurses do what they do. Doctors do what they do. Lawyers do what they do. We're not unionized. Why do the cops need a union? Is it impossible to find good men and women who just want to go and be a cop and they don't need to be unionized? They say, yeah, I'm going to hold myself accountable. I know I'm a good person. I'm not a hothead. I'm not going to go out there and do a lot of these things that we're seeing other cops do it. I think the idea is that if you don't have a union, if they're not unionized, then we're not going to have any police officers. That's the big fear. The big fear is, well, they need a union because they need collective bargaining. And if we do something by a stroke of the pen, we make police unions unlawful, we ban them or whatever, we're not going to have any cops anymore. That's what their argument is. Cops, they get, you know, dumped on is their perspective, and nobody likes them, and they have unequal pay. And so if cops come in and they work for the government on an individual basis, they're going to get less representation, they're going to get less compensation, they're going to get more personal liability, and therefore they're not going to become cops anymore. So the counter to that is we're not going to have any cops. If we get rid of the unions, we won't have any cops. I don't buy it for a second. Not even a second. I still think there are many, many good men and women out there who want to be cops. There are many good cops. Not every cop is a bad cop, but a lot of them are. And I think a lot of it is because of the union. There would be less bad cops. There would be more good men and women coming in if we had less of the blue line, the blue shield, this culture of uniformity and protection for all of the police. Will you shadow ban? Yeah, I clicked ban on him. I don't know if he's still there. I did block him from my window, but I don't know if he's been blocked on YouTube. I apologize for that. I'll fix that on the next setting. Didn't know we were going to have a spammer on the channel. Inappropriate comments are not allowed here. Fentanyl is killing our young people here in Canada. Does protect and serve hold any weight legally? Can cops fake a drug screen on a dead body? That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they could fake a drug screen on a dead body. I mean, they could fake any test anywhere. They can fake DUI blood results. They can fake anything. So yeah. I don't know if protect and serve has any weight legally. I haven't seen that in any statutes or anything, but I just haven't. I really haven't looked into that. Thanks so much for answering my questions. Really enjoying the stream. The Cave of Time. Thanks for being here, my friend. I appreciate it. You know, I'm really glad that people are showing up and tuning in because it's an important conversation. So here's a good one. Crazy Cozy says, you need to do some ride-alongs. Your perception is way off. You have your bad cops, but to say they want to go lethal weapon on everyone is crazy with a K. Crazy with the K. And listen, I have actually done a ride-along, not multiple ride-alongs. I've done one, and it was a very eye-opening experience. And I've told the story before. I actually tell it in my book. On the first chapter of this book, Beginning to Winning, I talk about it. My very first ride along with an officer changed my whole perception of how they do things and why they do things. I was still a law school student. This must have been in 2009, and I did my first ride along, and the officer was basically insane. He wasn't out there to serve and protect. He was out there to just generate revenue. That's all he wanted to do, and he kept a running tally of how much revenue he was generating. So we would impound a car for driving on a suspended license, and he would say we would get back into the car. I'm a totally green, like, first year law student. I know nothing about criminal law, know nothing about the police. I have no idea. In my mind, police are serve and protect. I actually wanted to be a prosecutor. It's a little known secret. I wanted to go in and be a prosecutor, and this was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. It was very disgusting behavior what I saw. Every arrest, he'd go, okay, driving on a suspended license is a class 1 misdemeanor. It's a $2,500 fine. They'll probably plead guilty for about $500. So it's $500. The impound fee is going to be about $175 if they get it out the next day. If they don't, then it's going to be another $30 every day. He said, well, that woman we just stopped probably is not going to have any money to get it out. So that vehicle is going to be basically turned over to the state. They're going to sell that at auction. Probably go for $2,000. So between that, the impound fee, the selling at auction, and so on and so forth, that one case is going to generate about $3,200 for the city. And I was like, whoa, that's what we're looking at? And he just kept doing that. We probably made 15 to 20 different stops. And every time he cited somebody, he'd come back, okay, not wearing a seatbelt's $90, light bulb out, $300, so on and so forth. All night. By the end of the night, we're up to like $20,000, $25,000 in revenue that one cop had generated. That's the perspective. So Crazy Cozy says, I need to do some ride-alongs. That was one of the cops. Now, that's not every cop. I will happily acknowledge that. But this guy that was his mindset. And the other cops there, they knew that too. We were back there in their break room. We went down to the shooting range. I did a whole little visit, and I was very glad that they did. Thank you for showing me around. Thank you for taking me through there. I learned a lot. And that was one of the key points in my career where I decided I am never going to be a prosecutor. I will never go on that side of the law, because I saw a lot of people who we were taking their cars and citing them and charging them with crimes who didn't deserve it, they weren't doing anything wrong. They really weren't, and it's going to ruin their lives, most of them. It was very, very sad, very eye-opening experience, and that helped kind of lead me to my path here in criminal law. I don't agree with what happened to George Floyd, but saying 21 is being too young to be a police officer and that they think they're in a war zone. What do you say about the military service members then? What I say about them, they are actually going to a war zone. They are actually going to a war zone. The military service people, they are. Send them over there. That's the whole point. When you're, 18, 21, you want to just break things. So we send them to the military in a war zone where they go out and break and destroy things and kill people. The military is trained to kill people. The police are not. They are here in a civilian society with civilian people. They are not in a war zone. They should train and be trained accordingly and act accordingly. MZ Williams, no, the cops can't fake a drug. Okay, so people are answering other questions. What can we as a people do about the union contract allowing police to purge their misconduct records due to the union contract? Is a great, great question. We just have to address that on an administrative level. They can't not be allowed to do that. The police union contracts, they can't get rid of this malfeasance anymore. The public, the city councils, anybody who's engaging with these unions at the time being, their misconduct cannot be eliminated anymore. I don't know why this is not already in place. This is where I would start personally. If I was leading this movement, I would start with transparency, accountability. Why are their records being purged? Why are they being expunged? They should be around forever so that we have a database where we can see these things. If I get a charge on my bar complaint, I'm a licensed lawyer in 2 states. If somebody wants to file a complaint, that sucker is on there. It drops off after a certain period of time, but you can still find it. Why are these cops not doing the same thing? Why are they not held accountable? Defense attorneys should get paid the same as prosecutors. Make it a fair fight, somebody says. Not sure how you. Sorry, everybody. I must have only blocked him on the on my one. I apologize. I will get a moderator for the next show, and I'll go ahead and end it. Apparently, we have a spammer who I thought I blocked, but I did not block. And I will make sure that we have Faith or somebody from my office on board who can actually go in there and block these spammers. I have a feeling this may continue to be a problem. This is what I'm talking about, right? We're trying to have a serious conversation here. We have spammers who come on here and they just start blasting, kill the cops. Is that somebody who is really a part of this conversation? Or is that an agitator? Is what we're seeing in the public, where we're seeing cops instigate and agitate, what's happening with that? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end it because I can't kind of go moderate that at the beginning or right now. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's been a good conversation. I really love the comments. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to do the show the same time next week, Wednesday, 4 p.m. It will be something that is moderated. So if the spammers come back, I'm going to have my Faith or myself. I'm going to get set up so I know how to do it correctly this time, because I thought I already blocked him, but of course that didn't happen. Somebody asked, where can we get a copy of your new book? Yeah, thank you for that question, John. John Braddock, how are you, man? It's Beginning to Winning. It's on Amazon, and it's how to fight your case and succeed in the criminal justice system. It's got, there's me on the back. And it's sort of a 9-step process. It's really for people who have been charged with a crime, but I do talk a lot about sort of my evolution from becoming sort of a hot-headed prosecutorial type, let's round all the criminals up and throw them in jail, to where I'm at now, advocating for the people, advocating for justice reform and less cops, more freedoms for people. I talk a little bit about that transition, so you can check it out on Amazon. Thank you everybody so much for being here. I know this is a long stream, but it's fun. I think it's important. And we'll be back here same time, 4 p.m. Arizona time, whatever that translates to your home state. I want to wish everybody a wonderful night. Please stay safe and carry on this conversation forward. We went through a lot of the different possibilities in terms of petitioning the government for a redress of grievances. Let's think about that. What does that look like? What do we really want to do so that we can improve our justice system, improve our lives, and prevent this type of stuff from ever happening again? I'm Robert Gruler, R&R Law Group. Thanks for watching the Watchers. We'll see you next week.